Hi, folks. Welcome to a conversation with CanREA. I'm joined today by Robert Hornung. Robert is the President and CEO of the Canadian Renewable Energy Association. Robert, thanks for taking the time.
It's my pleasure. Happy to be here.
So let's just jump right into it. I have a few questions for you, and I'm just going to read the question here. What motivated the decision to combine the wind and solar energy industries into one organization, and how does the new entity plan to work to foster renewables in general?
So, CanREA was formed on amalgamation of the Canadian Wind Energy Association and the Canadian Solar Industries Association. And the drivers behind that, one of them is simply the fact that there are member companies who are multi-technology companies. It's increasingly rare to find companies that work only in wind or only in solar. You've got a growing number of companies that are involved in multiple technologies. But I think more importantly, there is a recognition and understanding of the synergies between these technologies, and the recognition that these technologies working together can offer a broader range of solutions, a more comprehensive set of solutions for customers. And it's that argument, recognizing that these three technologies working together can play a key and central role in helping Canada move to net zero greenhouse gas emissions. But in terms of the mandate of the organization, it's broad in a couple of ways. One, that's multi-technology in terms of looking at wind, solar, storage. And when we talk about storage, it's storage applied in hybrid projects or co-located with renewables, or standalone storage, because standalone storage can also help facilitate the integration. But it's also looking at these technologies across a broad range of applications, from the large utility scale wind or solar farms to the solar PV so it's quite a broad mandate, but again, informed by the fact that there's a very clear sense that all of these solutions have a role to play in moving us forward.
Actually, this statement just ties in with my next question. As you know, Canada just announced its plan to reach net zero by 2050. How do you see this plan being implemented, and when can we expect to see something?
Yeah, well, I'll start off by saying that I think the release of the new climate plan by the federal government is actually a very important step forward, both for moving towards net zero by 2050, but also for our industries. And the plan is quite explicit that getting to 2050 is going to require a significant expansion in clean electricity production. And you need that significant expansion because you're going to need that electricity to electrify transportation and industry and buildings. So, and the plan explicitly talks about the fact that we probably need sector in Canada grow double or triple in size to enable us to go. So that represents a tremendous amount of opportunity for our industries, because we know that electricity is going to have to be affordable, and there are no technologies that are more cost competitive today than wind and solar to be able to deliver on that. So implementation, the federal government itself, we all know electricity is an area of provincial jurisdiction primarily. So the federal government has limits to the policy levers. In this plan, I think it pretty strongly demonstrates it's going to use some of them. The proposal to increase the carbon price is very, very significant, sends a very clear signal over the next price to increase at a steady, transparent rate, and that is going to influence investment decisions. People are going to think about that when they're making decisions going forward. The federal government plan all moving to a net zero electricity grid before 2050, and it talks about the potential of using a clean electricity standard to help us get there. Now, that is a concept that, in theory, we're supportive of, and we're going to be very about what that might look like and how that's designed, but has the potential to be a really powerful tool, much as standards played a really important role in moving us to phase out coal generation. Track to do, by 2030. The other thing I would highlight, I guess, from the plan is the plan did, two more things, I guess. One is provide $1 billion over 4 years to support the deployment of renewable energy and smart grid technologies. Again, what does consultation, what does the program look like? What are the terms and conditions? What are the criteria? We'll be involved in that and helping to scope that. But the significance of the commitment is important, and we'll be part. The government has also made a very strong commitment towards energy efficiency. And Energy efficiency is important because we have been arguing as CanREA consistently with both the Fed across the country that if you're going to invest money in terms of making a building more energy efficient, whether it's a home or a business or a commercial operation, at the same time, be looking at how can I make that building more energy self-sufficient and how can I do that? And so we're trying to ensure that those programs are scoped out in a way that support for energy efficiency investments. They can also secure support, for example, putting solar PV up on the roofs. So these programs, what we have right now are sort of funding commitment through a budget. So it's not firm until we've gone through the budget, but we've got directions, funding commitments, and now it's work on details.
Yeah.
And that's where, an organization like ours will to ensure that the programs are truly effective going forward.
You've already mentioned that there's going to be a program, but what do you foresee this, if at all you can comment on that, but what do you foresee this looking like? Like, is it like an initiative? Is it funding other programs that fund other programs? Or is it something like a rebate?
We had advocated for programs, particularly on the solar side, for grant programs that would help to cover a portion of the cost of installing solar, residential stream and a sort of commercial and industrial stream. Mm-hmm. So that's the kind of framework we've been approaching it by. Nice. We're hoping the government is in the same sort of mindset as we'll be in the next little while.
What about thinking of something like an incentive? You were familiar with the ITC and how a lot of the experts credit the ITC for the growth in solar capacity in the United States and for the creation of all the thousands and thousands, hundreds of thousands of jobs. Wouldn't that be a better initiative to implement now?
Well, the first thing, the solar industry and we has certainly had discussions with the federal government about sort of tax-based incentives like that. The Department of Finance has shown very little interest in having tax expenditures targeted in that way. Mm-hmm. And although now is a time where that's more likely to be amenable to the government, I actually think there are factors that these technologies are increasingly cost competitive. And government will come back and say, well, you need an incentive. I thought you were on your way to be the cheapest form of electricity, as the IEA just said. There are situations where look at the sort of the resistance that the government has had to this concept in the past. It's also challenging now a strong commitment, for example, to carbon pricing. And so we're going to significantly increase the cost of competition, and that should make your technologies more competitive. We do the concept of a tax credit, but I'm being honest, I think that given the resistance we've seen historically, we're more likely to succeed in getting government support for other kinds of measures like grant programs and things that we were talking about earlier. So the good news, I think, is that there's a growing recognition that some support is required. And I think it'll differentiate a little bit when we look forward in terms of utility scale and behind the meter activity. In Alberta right now, we have utility scale solar projects moving, and you've got a lot in the queue, lots of projects in the queue. So those costs have come down and enable that to come forward. It is a different story behind the meter, and we do need some challenging, given past history, to make that a tax credit initiative to do that. But we need to continue to work to ensure that there are policies in place like the grant would enable these technologies to move forward, continue to gain economies of scale, do things like ensure that these projects can be aggregated, that we have better net metering policies, all sorts of different initiatives that can help to drive the industry forward. We will see in this that will allow us to expand the deployment of solar going forward. And I would not discount things like of the carbon price. When people see their home electricity costs increasing, because the fossil fuel electricity that's providing that's increasing for energy self-supply, energy independence as well going forward. So we know there's a strong interest out there, and economic signals are starting to move in the right direction, I think.
So now the next one has to we're looking back inwards at CanREA. It's now this solar versus wind thing. There's that concern that maybe one of these would take priority.
We have a very clear mandate in the new association, which is to work for wind, solar, and storage, both in front of the meter. And in the end, our success as an association is going to be judged on whether we're able to move all of those things forward. Right. Let's put it this way. I think a lot of the key policy frameworks that we need to enable to take big leaps forward are incipient, right? They are things like we need carbon pricing, we need electrification, we need the movement to a clean electricity grid. We enable customer choice. Those are not sort of technology specific things. Those are changes that, if implemented, benefit all of the technologies going forward. Right? Directors that is reflective and representative of both front of the meter and behind the meter interests. We have representatives from store companies, primarily wind companies, sitting on the board. And part of the rationale, as I said earlier, in coming together was, one, we recognize there are, right, and that we can bring to all sorts of customers or stakeholders more comprehensive and effective solutions together than we can. The other thing was, we realized there are going to be sometimes points of disagreement or tension, whether between technologies or between front of the meter and behind the meter. And that was explicitly recognized when the association was created. And the feeling was, we are much better served as an industry if we can look at those differences and agree within the industry on a path that sort of deals with that. Sort of everybody takes a bit of wine in their water or water in their wine and moves forward, as opposed to competing with each other in front of regulators or with governments or with system operators. And so it is a challenge to us as an industry to demonstrate that, yes, we can work to a solution. And it's made easier by the fact that we have, as I said, a growing number of leading companies who are not just single technology companies of the meter or behind the meter companies, that are now active across the entire sort of spectrum, and therefore have an interest in seeing all of that moving ahead. So like there are always, even when I was just with CanWEA, even within the Wind Association, there are different views on issues, right? and different companies feel they are better served or worse served by a decision one way or the other. I mean, the job of an association is to find a path forward that goes beyond the lowest common denominator. Because at the end of the day, to the bare minimum, you're not really providing very much value. So we have to be active in terms of facilitating and enabling those conversations in I don't want to use the word, those solutions to be found that enable all of the technologies and all of the scales. I think this makes sense going forward. So that's essentially our challenge as an association to manage that. But I think we have a very clear mandate to do that. I mentioned earlier, and when you first asked the question, was this wind taking over solar, or was it, an amalgamation? It was very clearly an amalgamation. I mean, it was the independently, separately sort of assessed and weighed whether this was in the interest of their memberships, and each decided yes. We brought the vote to our members in each association. Overwhelming majority support in both associations for moving forward, which in my mind means that we've got a really strong base of support from our members to work to address that challenge and to meet that sort of challenge that's been set for us, to speak with one voice on behalf of.
One thing that I really like about this is storage. Storage actually holds the key to the growth of these, because these are all intermittent, as I call it, right? Energy sources.
Yeah, sure. I mean, the first thing I'd say is I'd agree with you that storage is an absolutely critical part of the mandate. When wind and niche elements of the electricity system, we were just a little corner over here. Storage wasn't a front and center issue. As we become, increased source of new generation coming onto the grid, and then looking out to 2050, overwhelmingly the largest source of new generation going forward. When you get to those higher penetration levels, storage is in terms of enabling that to happen. And there are a broad range of storage technologies, right? There's long duration storage, short duration storage, batteries, flywheels, hydro dams, hydrogen, all sorts of technologies that can sort of help to facilitate this role. And I think from my perspective, we talked about some of the behind the meter solar, right? It's not just an economics question. There are regulations that are barriers. There are all sorts of other things. Storage is in that regard, right? We have an electricity market like Alberta, which is now involved in consultations for how do they redesign their market rules to participate in the market, because right now it can't really. It has storage has a number of services it could offer into the Alberta grid, and therefore you don't see a lot of investment going on in terms of storage at this time. But we are actively involved in those discussions. Mm-hmm. You have similar to the IESO, looking at how do we have to make changes to enable and facilitate deployment of storage. I think storage is going to be an area of tremendous growth. You already see it dates where I think electricity market evolution is a bit more advanced, and therefore there are more economic opportunities for storage to be deployed in the United States. You would see a large-scale solar project built without storage. Like, it's almost always going to be both going forward. And that trend is going to come here as well. Right? It's an opportunity for tremendous growth, but it does require changes in market structures and regulatory frameworks, like really down to the detail, kind of enable it and make it happen. The good news is I think there's a growing recognition, and I would say now a strong recognition amongst all stakeholders, not just our industry, but amongst the utilities, amongst the system operators, that this is coming and these changes need to happen. So I think you've got a lot of discussions on this, and I think we're going to be well positioned for some really exciting stuff going forward.
Well, thanks, Robert, for taking the time to join us, and for answering some of the questions we have. And we do hope to see you again in the show. And as the program gets implemented, we hope to have you because we'll be having more burning questions coming through, and would like to have a conversation about that. And again, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much. I very much appreciated the opportunity.